Hey everybody, Coach Kurt here with Valve Scully Fight Team doing episode 41 of 2 FMA-Nerds Talk About Stuff. So running a little late this morning, but it's how things go anyway. So this morning I will be bringing on Isabel Lamers. We are going to be talking about her upcoming film project, the Filipino Karate Kid. So I'm going to bring up her Kickstarter for it because this is an independent film project. And as we talk about various ways that Filipino martial arts can be showcased, more importantly, Filipino culture can be showcased in modern media, this is actually one of those great opportunities to showcase that and to bring our culture and our beloved Filipino martial arts scene to popular media and movies. So I'm gonna pop this up real quick and give the promo a watch, and when she pops in, we'll get started here. One sec, let me get this thing ready. Here we go. And here we go.
Hi, I'm Isabel Lamers, and I've been a storyteller my whole life.
I'm an actor, writer, and co-producer of the short film Filipino Karate Kid. Filipino Karate Kid is a film about mixed-race identity explored through the lens of martial arts. It's about Nia, half Filipina kickboxer, who wants to join the local Filipino martial arts team in the Philippines so that she can participate in the national championships. In reality, though, it's her chance to finally fit into a culture that is her home but that treats her as a foreigner. But joining the team isn't easy. She loses her first battle, and the owner of the gym, Angel, doesn't want any newbies. Luckily, one of the fighters, Malik, secretly offers his help to train Nia, and she has so much to learn. Meanwhile, at every step along the way, she's navigating her mother's expectations, hoping to finally garner her acceptance. With renewed confidence, Nia confronts Angel, attempting to join the team. She goes too far, and now she has to fight no other but Angel herself. It's her last chance to prove herself worthy of making the team. Filipino Karate Kid is an action-packed, light-hearted, female-driven martial arts film with exciting fight scenes that shed a light on Filipino martial arts. It also explores the delicate subject of mixed-race identity. The pain of being excluded from your own people is a very particular one and hard to describe if you haven't experienced it. At the same time, being excluded from a group that you're actually a part of is a pain almost everyone can relate to. And this is why this film is so important. It shows that nobody can make you fit in but yourself. For those who know me, yes, this is a very personal story based on my own experience of me growing up between the Philippines and Germany and not quite fitting in anywhere. For some, the Philippines might seem like an exotic destination, but for us, it's home. This is why we want to feature our country and culture in this film. Me and my whole film team would be eternally grateful for your support in making this film reality. Your contributions would go towards proper pay and better working conditions, as well as allowing us to spread our message to a wider audience, with the goal of developing Filipino Karate Kid into a full-length feature film in the future. Hopefully, we can inspire some other lost souls to find a home as well. Please join us on this incredible journey. Thank you so much.
Let's unmute myself. Anyway, so that's pretty awesome. What a way to showcase Bayanihan and Kapwa. And yeah, honestly, we, as I stated before, we need more Fil-Am representation in the community or just in movies in general, because an interesting thing, what happens with Filipino martial arts in movies is you see it everywhere, but we don't get the credit for it. So what a way to demonstrate and say, hey, Filipino hero, Filipino film, let's do this. So let me bring on my guest. Isabel, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Yeah. We're running a little late, but it's good to go.
Sorry.
It happens. It happens. So yeah, we showcased your film and gave a little introduction to what the project is. However, I want to hear from your side of the story, because you alluded to there being more into this conversation about being enough, because when we deal with our Filipino identity or multiple identities, there is this question about being enough, which the fact is we are Filipino enough. So can you give us the backstory from your like very personal side of why this film is important to you and where it came about?
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro, Kurt. I'm really excited
Yeah.
to be here. I have a very personal background with the story, obviously, as you can see also in the video. It's been a big struggle in my life to be allowed to identify as Filipino, which sounds really weird. It's like I'm choosing it. But growing up there and then later on moving to Germany, I have never had been allowed to say where I'm from because everyone seemed to be confused about it. And at some point, I just had to accept that people will react that way, that they are just confused and don't know. I've had the weirdest responses of like, how can you be from two places at the same time? Or well, you have to be born in one of them, and things like that, where you end up arguing and defending almost your own identity, which I think is so weird nowadays, especially where there's people redefining their identity and all these things. I feel like it shouldn't be a thing anymore. And I think because of me training martial arts and especially discovering Filipino martial arts, it kind of like all clicked together that my Filipino identity and the struggle with it kind of also is seen in Filipino martial arts, and me discovering it and not really being allowed to do it. And every time I'm like, well, I know I don't look Filipino, I'm sorry. And it just all clicked into place at some point, especially when I was in touch more with Filipinos, because I think that most of you guys or people who grew up in the States kind of understand it a bit more, especially if they grew up fully here, because then obviously the struggle might be on a different side where you look Filipino, but you also feel American. But American society might be like, well, are you from here though? So yeah, they will relate to me more, and that helped a lot, I think.
Yeah, it's the whole where are you really from?
Yeah.
That question. So, because for me in particular, as a Phil-Am, I was actually born in the Philippines, but I was adopted by an American family who are white, and then I was raised here in the States. So, as when it comes to it, my accent isn't Filipino, and when it does, it's more like Samoan and Hawaiian because that's what I grew up around. I don't speak Tagalog, I don't speak Cebuano, I don't speak Sabayan. So like, I wasn't raised with it. Like many others, I rediscovered my culture through the Filipino martial arts, and from there, I've continued to grow and educate myself. And in the process, I'm educating my children. But in particular about this multiracial identity. I mean, my children are half white, so this is a question that they've already are exploring, and it's a beautiful question, but it is a complex one. So as an adult going through this, because there is this issue about the, again, there's quite a bit of identities. I'm still trying to ferret out a proper term for it, because we have so many identities that we're trying to process through. But in dealing with that, there's this issue about decolonization, and there's a lot of anger associated with it. And what's important with it is to move past it and mentor the next generation. So in this conversation and question about it, as somebody who's gone through that process and is going through that process, what would you suggest to mentor the younger version of yourself in understanding your identity and moving forward of creating what is you, which is your identity?
I think that's a very nice question. It's partially also why I'm making the movie, because I think we need to see it out there more, and that was my main struggle. When I grew up, I never saw people like me, so I just didn't know where I fit in, and I didn't know that it was a problem. I just felt, like I didn't fit, and I just didn't know what to attribute it to. So I think for newer generations,
for one, it is more a discussion. So I think that just the fact that we can openly discuss identity is something that gives more space to realize that it could be a problem and something that's a burden, because for most of my time, I didn't know that those problems that I had or the struggles were related to identity. I just thought something's weird in me, or I can't communicate properly. And another thing I think that also would be one of the main messages of the movie is to really listen into you and see which expressions of what make up your identity, because that at the end is what it's about for you personally. It doesn't, you can, I feel, for me, it sometimes helps me to categorize it like this, oh, this is kind of German of me, or this is kind of Filipino of me. But at the end of the day, it helps to have a frame, but it also just helps to accept all these parts and not try to fit into one or the other.
Yeah, because I mean, we're an amalgamation of our life and our experiences. Because, like, in the end of all things, we are the sum of the totality of our experiences. So, whatever we identify as, that is what it was, as who I was at that present moment. Because we're different people every day, and we're constantly striving to be the best version of ourselves moving forward. It's a complex question. It's a complex discussion to process through, because it's not just for somebody with a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multinational identity. It's like everybody struggles with this today. And what I find in certain communities, like my veteran community, is there's this issue of my identity is based upon my profession and how good I was at it, how effective, how efficient I was at that. But the fact is, that fits on a business card. That's what you do. But that's not necessarily who you are. And there's that trying to figure out that distinction of, this is what I do to make my living, and that's not all that I am, but who I am is who I make myself out to be. So
yeah, it's similar to people changing jobs or when they retire. I guess it's like, who am I now and what is relevant to me? And I've had people from, I don't know how to say that, but maybe like from one cultural background also struggle with things like that, of not fitting in certain spaces. So I think that that's a very common experience. And if we take out the categories and the ethnicity thing, then everyone kind of gets wanting or feeling like they belong somewhere, but they're not allowed or accepted into the space.
Yeah, that's a lived-in experience for myself. And which is interesting is, like, you cannot, like, using the analogy of quitting a job, you can't quit being Filipino. You can't quit necessarily being German. You can't quit necessarily being I mean, you could kind of technically give up your national citizenship, but the fact is, those are intrinsically going to be you. It's like the aspect of, you can't kill parts of self. You have to live with those parts of self, love, heal, or respect. But if you're killing parts of self, you're killing yourself. In a existential, emotional, philosophical standpoint. So yeah, it's complex, but it's interesting.
What do they say? You can take the Filipina out of the Philippines, but you can't take the Philippines out of the Philippines.
Yeah.
I like saying that, because I feel like the things come with us, like food tastes, especially humor sometimes, and the way we see life. I think there's so many things in culture that are so intangible that there's no point of denying it. And I think my personal life story in particular, because when we moved to Germany, our parents separated, and our mother, who's our Filipino side, went back home. And kind of, because at the time it wasn't as easy to travel, we barely saw each other, and it kind of felt like we had to assimilate to German culture and forget our Filipino side. And it felt so strange for me growing up fully in the Philippines with all the culture, and suddenly being like a cut, and not having that anymore.
Yeah, it's typical of the immigration story, especially with the first generation, where they are trying to be, let's say, American for this instance. They want to adopt everything that is to be American, and discard all of, as part of the process of healing. Because if they're coming from, say, a refugee status from war, or all these, and persecution, they don't want to be reminded of the reasons why they fled, so they fully adopt the culture. And of their new nation, and they don't pass on what was beforehand to their children. And there's this major disconnect and resentment that occurs within the next generation. Like, why didn't you teach me Tagalog? Why didn't you teach me this, that, and the other? Like, because there is that disconnect. But we also have to keep in mind, what is the reasons why there's a disconnect from the parental side. And again, a lot of it can be rooted in trauma. Most of it actually is rooted in trauma. So there's that. But again, once we come to it as an adult, though, we can understand it, appreciate it, and find our own way back, because ultimately it's our life. So we take control of that and learn what we're going to learn. So we've kind of danced around your life story a bit, but let's kind of go back. Where in the Philippines? Actually, let's go further back. Your father, who is German, your mother, who's Filipino. How did they meet in the Philippines? And and where were you born in the Philippines, and where did you grow up there before moving to Germany?
They met. I think she was a secretary. I always feel so embarrassed because it's like these cliche of like white guy and foreigner guy and like Filipina. So yeah, they met at a workplace and then fell in love and ended up dating. And they had their first date in Cafe Isabel, which was spelled with a Y in the Philippines. So that was the inspiration for my name. Just that my mom thought she'd do something different and put an I instead, which I'm like, that's what everyone does. But yeah, from her perspective, it was very different. So yeah, I was born in Makati, so yeah, Manila, and then I was born and raised there as well. And we lived in San Juan, and yeah, went to school there. And I moved to Germany when I was like 10, about 10.
Okay. So you have distinct memories of growing up in the Philippines. And
it literally felt like home. And I didn't know Germany much. We had been on vacation sometimes, but when we moved back, it was kind of a rush and everything. And then I didn't really know. I spoke German, so that was helpful. But yeah, it felt I never really arrived. It's like, yeah.
So you have 3 language sets that you're dealing with. You're dealing with Tagalog, you're dealing with German, and now you're dealing with English, which from a pure American standpoint, that's Americans in general are pretty limited when it comes to that global exposure to languages. Typically in America, the secondary language that you'll probably speak is Spanish, but and very poor Spanish at that. But yeah, having multiple languages that are so distant linguistically, because you have a Austronesian language set, and then you have a Roma Italia German set that's very different. So that's interesting to navigate through.
I sometimes find it very interesting in my brain too, because I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't work. I sometimes struggle with language, I think, with finding words, because I think sometimes it just goes into the wrong box and searches for the words in the wrong place.
I can appreciate that. That's when I fluctuate through my accents. So,
or maybe it's just me being neurodiverse. I don't know. But yeah, I think though in the Philippines, that what I've experienced also with my mom, that she primarily, like, she spoke to me mostly in English, because I think because my dad didn't speak Tagalog, and I also sometimes feel like there's still kind of a Western focus of like, we want to be kind of like the US. And that's also something that I'm kind of trying to put into the movie as well, because I think it's not a toxic thing, but I think it's for our Filipino culture. It's a bit difficult if we keep looking for inspiration and looking to strive towards, Western culture and trying to be that instead of being our own.
I mean, it is the post-colonial, post-occupation mindset, where the Philippines, not only being a Dutch, a Spanish, a British, the Japanese occupation state, and then an American colony, we're all sorts of confused. And on top of all, we go all the way back, dealing with the Malay and the Muslim community in the South. I mean, we are a confused people. So the identity which we're trying to figure out and establish is, I mean, it's multifaceted, and on top of all that, it's complex as all things. But this is where I find in the West, as in like the Phil-Can, just Western raised Filipinos, there's this a resurgence to go back to pre-colonial identity or pre-colonial features. And this is where you see the rise of Filipino martial arts, cultural dances, the tattooing, and the music. Actually, one of the best parts about this resurgence that I find is actually it's the music representation, because I'm friends with Talilo Marfil, the flip hop musician. He has the anthem Big Flip, and like we have that anthem that we all wanted as young Filipinos and Filipinas, and like he put it out there for us. So that's and it's out in the forefront in the larger music scene, and there's this explosion of flip hop all over the place. So again, the identity is what we create, and also ties back to that inspiration of what was. So it's a beautiful hybridization of multiple identities.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I think I still sometimes feel when I'm home that it doesn't really translate there yet.
Yeah.
But it's because people are struggling to, you know, make a living and stuff like that, which like all seems obviously better or greener on the other side, I guess. But yeah.
So living in Germany, where in Germany were you raised, and how long were you there?
I lived in Germany like 9 years before, or 8 years before I moved out to study and stuff. To go to college, I moved to Holland, funnily. But I lived there nearby Berlin, which wasn't as cool as it's now. I had like some experiences of racism back then because it was like kind of countryside Germany, and the border had just came down like not too long ago. It was interesting, but now Berlin's like super cool. So
that's interesting. When I was in the army, I was trying to get stationed in Germany the entire time.
Really?
It didn't.
What happened? Why didn't you?
When I went active duty, we got stationed in Texas because it was the height of the surge during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. So, and then I did a rotation to Korea, which was amazing because we got actually stationed in the same place that my dad was stationed when I was a kid. So, But point being is, I tried to get to Germany, didn't happen. My youngest brother, on the other hand, he got stationed in Germany for I think 3.5 years there at Vilsik. So it's like, I'm a little jealous, but what happens?
There's like a funny affinity towards Germany in the US. I find like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm also German. I'm like, really?
And that's also an interesting standpoint, because when we talk about these various identities, especially within the Filipino diaspora, especially when we're dealing with a mixed race child, is often in this exuberance to become more Filipino, they forget the other half of that's only half of their identity. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because the other half, especially if they're raised here in the States, if they have German ancestry, if they have Irish ancestry, unless they're on the East Coast, but they don't embrace that lived in. I guess it kind of comes back to the lived in culture, because if you're multiple generations disconnected from, say, your German roots or your Irish roots, then can you really say you're German and Irish?
Yeah. It becomes far, right? The connection becomes like remote.
Yeah.
I think that it's partially also like you have to, I guess people need to focus on something first. If they're like trying to reconnect with one side, they would have to like let go a bit of the other to explore one. I don't know.
Perhaps. Yeah, because for an American who is raised in the States that has, say, like a German or Irish ancestry, the Germans came over in multiple phases, both like in the 1700s and the 1860s, 1890s. So that's over 100 years of disconnect.
Yeah.
Although, like, when you go to, say, like the Midwest or New York, I mean, it's very old German. I mean, New York was a German colony.
Yeah.
Then, as for the Irish they've been coming over since the 1800s, and again, it's all the East Coast or in Appalachia. So, but there's such a major disconnect of several generations. It's an interesting situation for American-born with immigrant ancestry versus a new immigrant coming from the Philippines within first generation. That identity is still very present. It's still very lived in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's part of the issue.
Yeah. I think it's a very different experience when you especially the time is different now and then. Yeah, because I think maybe back then, and I don't know, but maybe I get history wrong, but I have the feeling that it was more common to be a first generation immigrant and come over and set up a new life.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting parts also from my German side of my identity was when I moved to Germany, I, for the first time, got, from history lessons, got to learn about all the dark side of German history.
Yeah.
And there is, thankfully, I mean, it's a good thing, like a lot of, not shaming, but it's a lot of like, there is a lot of guilt in the whole country about the past. And I remember once going on a vacation with my family, and there were a ton of European nationalities present. Like they had like camps. So it was like, hands up for the Spanish, and everyone cheered, and then the French, and then it was at the end, and the UK, and then it was like Germany, and everyone booed. And I was like, wow. And I just like, when I moved there first, I was like, yay, Germany. And I didn't really know what it means, but I just went there, and then I was like slowly more and more disappointed of what I thought. I thought it just looks like the Alps and stuff, and was like really pretty and green. But yeah, it was interesting to be associated with an identity that then isn't really great, apparently. So that's
and the question from that arises is, how long do we hold on to that guilt and that shame and that self-flagellation? Because again, in the American standpoint, and dealing with, say, with the institution of slavery, is if there's 5 generations removed, can we honestly say that we were a slave owner and thereby racist? The answer is no, because unless you're currently doing it, or your parents, and even better yet, for you, the individual living in the present, unless you're currently engaged in it, the answer is still no. And so you can move forward. And the guilt you shouldn't hold on to the guilt, because you can acknowledge it. And this is my own personal belief. One can acknowledge that guilt and that fact, just like you can acknowledge that part of self that is, say, a survivor, that part of self that has those dark places and has done those dark things necessary to survive. But that gives you an opportunity to accept that that part of self that made you today more compassionate and empathetic, caring person, but that came at the behest of pain. And in the process, you can heal that parts of self, love that parts of self, respect that parts of self, but still embrace that in the more positive sense. And I think for countries and cultures that have that history of oppression, they have to acknowledge, yes, be aware of it, educate, so it doesn't happen again. But I don't know how long they need to hold on to that guilt collectively as a nation. And I don't know how long the rest of the world needs to hold on to that guilt, that anger and resentment as well. Because again, back to the Filipino identity issue of post-colonialism, is how long are the Filipino community going to be angry at the Spaniards, the British, the Portuguese, the Japanese, the Muslims, the Catholic Church? How long are we going to be angry at them? I mean, like, and on top of all, it's toxic, like it's caustic. So yeah, it's tricky overall, as many things are.
It's so interesting, because I'm wondering sometimes, do you feel like the anger towards, like because of colonization is very present in Filipino culture? Because I never had that impression before.
in doing these interviews, what I'm finding is actually it's American raised, Western raised Filipinos that actually have the majority of this displaced anger and resentment. And part of that's tied to this issue of their rediscovering their culture, their history through a third party after the fact, and they have the lived in experience. And on top of all that, their parents didn't necessarily teach this stuff to them because their parents are too busy trying to be Americans. So in the attempt to reconnect to their culture, that youthful generation is reconnecting with anger and resentment. And on top of all that, there's a certain socio-political ideology that's pushing a lot of this forward in the universities of these younger generations. So that doesn't help either. But yeah, it's mostly, it's Western-born Phil-Canadians that is really, because in talking with Filipinos that are still in the Philippines or grew up there, it's just their way of life. It's they grew up Catholic, they grew up post-colonial. It's just that's Filipino.
So, I mean, yeah, I grew up with American television, and that's why I sound the way I sound, because that's how I learned my English. Like, it has some aspects of Cartoon Network and stuff like that. I mean, and I just came, migrated myself. So I think it would actually help the Philippines to be a bit more, not angry, but just like be aware of which parts are appropriated and where are we not, where are we trying to follow too much instead of focusing on ourselves.
Yeah, it's the whole like, I am so Filipino, I'm going to show you how Filipino I am, and then showing up in the Philippines like, oh, this isn't the Philippines that I thought it was, and therefore I have this mabayang belief system, and there's this disconnect. So
it's very different. Yeah, I think that's what one of the things that is going to be shown also in the movie is that, for example, mestizas like me are usually treated as as kind of white. Especially like I think because I look so much more non-Filipino, it's just being commented on all the time as if it's a compliment.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, why are you like? It's not a problem to say that you're not even from here. You don't look like you're from here. And then it's being commented on my looks, which I think in Western countries now people are more aware and sensitive towards that. The fact that it doesn't feel good to just be judged and commented on by your looks, based on your looks. But back home, it's just like a thing. And because it is kind of saying, oh, you look white, it's supposedly seen as I'm complimenting you, which I think is kind of mean towards ourselves. Like, why is it a compliment to not look Filipino? That's just like absurd to me. Yeah,
because what is presented in the popular media of Filipinos, you have the Filipinos that get forgotten is the indigenous Filipino. Actually, there's two type of indigenous Filipinos. One that's highly in the forefront of things. That's your Igorots, your people, the mountain people, your headhunters, the Visayan Mandarigma warriors, like the very glorified Filipino, like Lapu-Lapu and all them. But everybody also forgets like the Negreros, the indigenous black people of the Philippines. And I don't
even
know why.
The Chinese immigrant kind of white Filipinos, like I lived in Mindanao for a while, and a lot of Muslim Filipinos in Mindanao look very white somehow. Like it's not necessarily, it's not related to them being Muslim. I think it's a mix of, but I saw a lot of like very light-skinned Filipinos in Mindanao, for instance. Like it's, like you said, there's so many former colonializers that we are such a mixed people.
Yeah, because like the other two Filipinos that you commonly see is the Mestizo Filipino, which is the current perspective in the media, because there's been so much adoption, marriage, and just creating of this new hybrid generation, for lack of a better term. And then of course you have the classic pure, I hate to say we're pure, but like full Filipino with the accent, short, brown in their flip-flops. So and very Catholic. So like there's some very interesting stereotypes, but there's ethnic groups that are forgotten about within the Philippines. For one, it's intentional. Two, there's a bit of guilt. Three, it's just people are just ignorant. So and it's behooving upon the community to learn that the Philippines itself is a multi-ethnic society that's blended together due to modern nations, to a modern nation state. So because I mean, as a nation, we're less than 100 years old. So
yeah, that's really nice you said. I like that. Yeah,
thank you. So back to the film. And your life story. When did you move to the States, and for what reasons?
I moved here 4 or 5 months ago, so I just arrived.
Oh, nice. Well, welcome. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm an actor, so I moved mainly for acting. I was here in January. I had a scholarship for acting training.
Oh, nice.
So I went to different acting schools, and I met with a manager who's also Filipino, Phil-Am. And there was a festival here, actually, Manila International Film Festival, with a lot of people from Manila who came over, and then I got a chance to join. And the manager that I met there kind of signed me on, and so I got to apply for a visa as an artist visa. So I was waiting in the Philippines, and then I just came over like literally a couple months ago. So
that's awesome.
It's mainly to pursue acting opportunities here. And
cool.
to live here, and
So are you in the process of getting your SAG card? Or is it SAG? There's the Screen Actors Guild. Yeah, SAG.
Yeah, it's SAG.
Okay.
I'm trying. I think it's probably quite difficult to get, but I am trying to get it.
I have a couple of friends that are going through that process through the FMA community. I have also a couple of friends that are stunt people, and it's really interesting going through that process. And also for a lot of martial artists, there is a few routes that they can take. Okay, now FMA show, martial arts show, we'll hit that obligatory part here. There's a few routes that a martial artist can go. They can, again, just take it as a hobby. Then they can be an instructor within the hobby or own a gym. They can be a professional athlete as a combat sports athlete. They can go into the professional profession of arms, military, law enforcement, personal protection. And then there's this other side, which is really cool. And I find the purely artistic side is the stunt community. And man, watching the stunt community is it's so much fun, because like dance, it is the absolute expression of joy in the thing that we do. So I would love to I would love to go explore that space with you and dealing with the stunt community.
Yeah, I think I discovered stunt partially because of acting. I did karate a bit when I was a kid, and mostly judo, but I kind of didn't feel, not safe is the wrong word, but I just didn't feel so welcome back then. It just felt like it wasn't a space where a young girl was, I don't know a word, but it's just like I didn't feel like I could connect so much. And I still loved it, but I just didn't find the right people there. And I guess it's maybe lack of having other women there, and maybe the whole drill discipline thing that I think might be a bit male driven, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's a martial arts thing to have discipline. But I don't know if I recently went to a dance class. This is just a side detour thing, but I recently went to a dance class with a martial artist, and they were saying that like, oh, I feel so warm and held, and it's such a safe space. And I was like, interesting. Like, obviously not all dance classes are like that at all. Like, it's quite the opposite. But this was a floor work class, and like very contemporary. And I think that's where you kind of are okay to say like, oh, my body doesn't want to do this. What can I do? And sometimes partially the reason why I want to make a female-driven and female-led martial arts movie is because I feel like that needs to be lifted up more. I would have started martial arts way sooner if there had been someone to get me in a bit, like from a, maybe not a woman's perspective, could have been a gentle man as well, or a trainer. So I didn't do that for a while, and then I got into stunt, and I realized, oh my god, this is fantastic. I don't get hurt and I can still fight and be aggressive and let that passion or passionate, all these, you know, aggression isn't something you usually express in everyday life. Or I mean, partially also anger is something you can totally vent out in stunt without hurting anyone, and it's totally fine. Which is also the case with acting, right? Like actors in certain spaces, if you train acting, you get to, you know, be crazy and be irrational and be unfair and all these things. So stunt fighting is the same thing for me, but in a physical version. And I really enjoy the choreography part of it and learning all these skills and pushing my body to do certain things that I've never tried before. I started with kickboxing as like a discipline, and used that in stunt fighting. And I think what got me really hooked here was also then discovering the Filipino stunt fighting groups here, stunt community here, because I was like, wow, I didn't know that there's this whole space for me all of a sudden where I can fit in, and it's like, you know, finally coming home or something.
Because you have people like Brian Sloyer there.
I mean, Jeremy Marinas is also Filipino. And
of course, you have Diana Inosanto and her husband through the Mars community. And of course, Ernie Ray. I think Ernie Reyes Jr. moved from California to Texas. I don't know. But there is such a strong community of FMA practitioners in the industry. It's quite amazing. And like,
I was just chatting to Brian. I was supposed to go to his class yesterday, so I'm going next week. But
how are you liking Berlin to Walk? So
no, I haven't tried it. That's why I haven't tried it yet. I was going to go yesterday, but I'll go next week, and then I can report back.
Nice.
I've mostly trained Inosanto style.
Okay. So that answers that question, because when it comes to Filipino martial arts, we all have our different camps and where we start. And in the case of the West, the majority of people who start in Filipino, I have introduction to Filipino martial arts. It's either through modern arnis in a secondary school or the Inosanto blend, and because those are clearly American developed Filipino martial arts, or Fil-Am martial arts. And then from there, obviously, you have like, and I should say Stockton with Serrata, because Inosanto blend is very influenced by the Serrata community. So I misspoke. So Serrata, modern arnis, and the Inosanto blend. And then you have like the transplants of, say, like Berlin to Walk, Pikiti and Pikiti Tarsia that have come to the US and have a lot of prominence. But I typically find people who start in FMA have those three backgrounds.
I see. Is there a background of fighting from the Philippines that you would recommend and like? Because that's something.
All of them.
I mean, our stunt coordinator is based here, so they obviously will have that style as well. But
1 second. Okay.
Oh yeah, it unzoomed you.
There we go. So every FMA style has its unique features that are special to it and have its benefits. But when one wants to, I should say, for like a totality martial art, obviously the Inosanto blend has so much that it draws from, and it's so widely understood and known. So there is that benefits. Modern arnis is very similar in that regard. It has such a depth of information and expression because it draws from so many different places, but has a very tied specifically to the Philippines and to FMA and as its root. It's one of those like it borrows and borrows, steals and borrows, and makes it its own. Pikiti Tercia Kali is probably one of the more expressive Filipino martial arts I would recommend exploring. It is a currently used combat system in the Philippines and in the military, especially through extension, say like SIOC and Atienza. But because the long flowing blade work and cuts, it's very showy and very beautiful to watch. The Karenza and the Sayas doing that. Balintawak is I'm a Balintawak player, and Balintawak is really great for that explosiveness, close range. It's very dynamic, especially underneath GM Bobby's camp. So, the Balintawak LA community is very great for expressing that because they are so dynamic. Sorada is a lot like that as well, where it's very dynamic and close range. So you have a lot that you can choose from. But again, from the American lexicon, it's typically Modern Arnis, Inasanto Blend, Sarada, Balintawak, and Pikiti Tercia are the 5 fundamental FMA styles that people will start with. Because the other one too is they're so widely seen in social media and in the movies. That's what people automatically gravitate toward. But there's some things like Lescas and De Campo and some of these others, and Villabril style or lightning scientific, or and of course Illustrissimo is one of those homegrown straight up from Manila that everybody should have in their wheelhouse, because on top of all it's very direct sword work. So there's so much one should explore them all.
That's part of the overwhelm, right? With we only have a short film for now that we're working on, so that's me. We started working on choreography right now. But at the end of the day, that's just a couple of minutes that we can fit in. So I'm like, what style are we going to go for? And how do we, because we're telling a lot of story in the choreography as well. The fight symbolizes the journey of identity. So it's going to be very intricate to try to show this shifting of styles and how the fighting represents the realization of our protagonist. So I'm very curious also to, when I get back home, to find the right person to work with, on the ground. I only work with GM Dagog, who trains in Luneta Park, and then one of the studios as well. But I'm not sure yet who to go with. And
Jim Dagog is a great place to start. So absolutely,
he's brilliant. He's this classic old master who will just beat you up in a second if you don't pay attention. He's just so fast. It's incredible.
I put it forth in the FMA discussion community, which is a Facebook-led prominent FMA community, as to who is or what is the Filipino equivalent to Mr. Miyagi. So in the case of the Filipino Karate Kid, the answer was so varied with everybody, and that's that. They understood, for people who understood the assignment, they gave the right answer of it depends, it's unique to me. So, but that is an interesting space to explore as well. But just for stylistic expressions, I mean, you have so many styles that you can play with. Say Modern Arnis, because GM Rodel is connected to that community. I mean, it's the double sticks in a wally is what I find is really clear to Modern Arnis. With the Inasanto blend, you see a lot of the silat in his low cuts and the very flowy southern influences. Sarada, it's the dance of death in close range and the lock and block that you see. Balintawak is that dynamic close range striking that is very recognizable. And in Pikiti Tercia, it's all those long cuts, especially that reverse pakal grip thrust that's very distinct. So I mean, if you're looking for key features for an FMA nerd to say, I see that, those are things. Because like the movie Dune, you can clearly see, and of course the stunt coordinator said the Atreides house, they're Balintawak, they're FMA. You can clearly see it, because when doing that training scene with Paul and Gurney Halleck, it's that's straight up grouping 1 and grouping 3 Balintawak. So so I don't know.
That's the thing that, like you said in the beginning, right? It's never been said out loud, and that's so frustrating. I've met some people from the German stunt people who worked on Dune, and they didn't I mean, they knew that it was FMA, but like no one really talked about it.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating because it took me forever to discover FMA. Like, I think the first time I heard about it, I was in a stunt workshop in Poland, and some random Polish trainer was like, "This is FMA," and I was like, "No way! Like, do you mean Filipino, like as in Philippines?" Like, I couldn't believe that he was teaching that, and I kind of like just ignored it because I thought that maybe just it's a name thing or whatever. And only later on, when I came here, that I heard about it's an actual martial arts. I was like, why isn't anyone talking about this?
Oh, it's interesting because this is typical of the same situation comes up in every interview, and every Filipino martial artist that I have met of a certain age is that they've discovered we have a Filipino martial art. It was my case as well, that we were participating in another system, and then there happened to be an assistant instructor or guest instructor or a seminar that said, "Oh yeah, here's Filipino martial arts." But like Filipino martial arts ran schools are so limited and so unknown in the in the wider lexicon or wider community of martial arts. It's the short answer of it is marketability. It's really hard. And sustainability, because Filipino martial arts has as vast as it is, has a limited appeal for the average American parent in suburbia, because the lack of competition routes. We're dealing with weapons. Yeah, we're dealing with weapons first. And so when a parent sees swords and knives and stabbing and cutting people, it's a little intense for them to deal with. However, they'll put their kids in boxing, Muay Thai, and Jiu-Jitsu, which is just as violent, just with a different modality. So that's
like you're more likely to be able to defend yourself if you're holding a stick rather than like your little hand and your I don't know.
But yeah,
I mean,
and it's the issue again, like sustainability, marketability, and lack of competition are the three things that I find with the reason why FMA isn't as prominent compared to schools like Jiu-Jitsu or boxing or Muay Thai or even karate, because a lot of us who started in martial arts, especially in the States, it was through karate, taekwondo, or judo, and then FMA was introduced in there. So yeah, it's curious. It's now because of 20 years later, our generation who was raised into that, now you're seeing FMA come to the forefront in a lot of these schools. And people they start with FMA and then they move on to something else, it's a new dynamic, and it's pretty cool to see at this point.
I think it's also very interesting from aspect of coordination, because like in I trained at Pomana for a bit, and they were saying that like, you know, hand-eye coordination, but also like the two sides of left and right is something that's like developmentally probably pretty good for kids. So I think
it's like cross-body. It's the bilateral symmetry and complex tasking, complex independent tasking. So exactly.
I think that's super useful that people, I mean, I've been seeing that I can like memorize things better, and I think it's very good for the brain.
You're connecting different hemispheres of your brain and coordination across the body. There's a really cool study that was done through, I think, UC Berkeley, with Guru Paul McCartney, through their martial arts department and their psychology department, their physio psychology department. But they did this interesting study about utilizing FMA as a complex system to look at brain activity and modalities of learning. And they found that because it's so complex in the beginning, your brain just absorbs all that, but it ends up being better for like coordination and adaptation later on. So the fire hose approach is great. It's confusing, obviously, because you're forcing a lot of this stuff to make it work, but in the long run, it ends up being better for training. And as we find also with, I mean, our body's a system. It works together, and so FMA does that in of itself. It forces you to work multiple limbs at different varying speeds, trajectories, and angles and whatnot, versus say like a static position of you start with a down block and you have an isolated stance. So like the learning modalities are different, complex, but it pays dividends in the end.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that drew me in when I started it. Like, I really felt it's completely different in a way to other martial arts, and in an interesting, almost intellectually equally stimulating way, which I don't remember from practicing judo or kickboxing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other martial art that I find is so like complex in the moment is actually jujitsu, because you have so much input at the moment that you're having to deal with. So you're so kinesthetically aware and attuned to it.
That's
And
true.
you have,
I recently started training some of that, but it's like a brain overwhelm.
No, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
So getting into acting, I'm always curious how an individual gets into acting versus like anything else that they do. So what was the inspiration of you getting into acting, and thereby, and by extension, getting into stunt work? We've kind of explored this a little bit, but let's go and flush it out a little more.
I think I remember wanting to be an actor when I was a kid. I think I saw some behind the scene footage and I was like, wait, this is a job. This is like the best thing in the world. Again, coming from like the background that I'm coming from, my parents weren't really supportive. I mean, like my dad in particular was like, no, that's not a job you can do. So I didn't do it at first. And went to study law like a good daughter would, and and then later on, when I was old enough to make my own decisions and make my own money, I was like, okay, now I'm doing it. So it's been a scary transition. It feels very irrational at times, but it's also the good part is that I tried not doing it and it didn't work. So it's like, okay. And getting into acting, I think the way I did it was starting with training and starting with exploring what it is that I need to learn and where am I struggling getting the results that I want to see. Because I think we all have kind of a sense of what we think is good acting. That's the thing that's, I think, a bit different maybe. I don't know if musicians would agree, but I think like sometimes if a tone is off, we can all hear it. But if someone acts bad, some people might still think it's good. So I think orienting on that and getting used to the feedback and seeing yourself and being critical with yourself in a way that's still healthy and productive is how I just keep on learning. I keep on training. And then I started applying and started getting agents, and I just kept going one step after the other. And one of the struggles that were interesting to mention in this point specifically is that my looks also were kind of in the way, because I don't clearly read as German at all, but I don't clearly read as anything else either. And when you're getting into acting, it's good to have a box. Like if you look like the badass gangster, then you can play that. Or if you look like a lawyer, then you can, or a doctor. A lot of people have that, I think, that they just clearly kind of can look like a doctor, and then it's a bit easier. So I've gotten a lot of no's because even in final selection rounds for like recurring roles in streaming stuff, where I was like, yeah, we just need a different ethnicity right now, or we have to go with someone white, or we have to, we need someone really Asian looking. So if they go by the ethnicities that I have, they can't really cast me accordingly. It has to be. So I started orienting towards action and sci-fi and, like things where it doesn't really matter. And I don't know if that was the inspiration. I think I just enjoyed fighting. That's how I came into stunts. But transitioning into acting, you become more aware of how do I look and how does that affect other people around me.
That's really interesting, because we know that there is typecasting, because it's clearly evident, because you see certain actors that you see them in the same role no matter what, and then when they break out of the role, it's one of two things: it's the what the hell is this, or that's nuanced and really cool. It's say like The Rock and Jason Momoa. They're both the giant men, badass and just scary, and then when they do comedy, or drama, it sometimes is off-putting for some, but it's also pretty cool to see them break out of like the typecasting. So yeah, I
It's
can
interesting
imagine.
because sometimes they say that the energy still stays the same. Like if someone once said that, for example, Meryl Streep is always
Mhm,
kind of this distant, aloof
mhm.
characteristic to her, and that goes through all of the roles a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Or
yeah,
you get people like Ryan Reynolds who just basically plays himself. So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's really interesting because again, with sci-fi and fantasy, that makes a lot of sense because especially with sci-fi, where I'll use The Expanse for example with the Belta Lotas. I mean, they are a people of an amalgamation of various ethnicities into the future, and
Hmm.
honestly, dealing with the biological ethnic trend that is coming to America by 2036. The Caucasians will be a ethnic minority overall, and everybody will be beige, or the majority of people will be beige. So there is
Yeah,
that circumstance.
yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, limiting your roles because you don't look enough like one or the other. Yeah, we know that's a thing. I mean, as consumers of media, but it is really interesting to hear about that
Hmm.
from behind the scenes, so to speak. So yeah,
It's
um,
interesting because a lot of people on our project that have identified with it, like our stunt coordinator, Lauren Mary Kim, is
oh
Chinese,
yeah,
but she looks
yeah,
dark skinned. So she has had the same thing. And her one of her reasons to move from acting into stunts was because of that, because
yeah,
she's not Chinese looking enough. So
yeah,
what do you do? Yeah, her assistant Nico Ramirez, who's assistant with action design, he also he's Filipino but could look Mexican maybe. So
yeah,
it's kind of like these. I think these ethnically ambiguous people, like our producers as well, are just struggling with the same thing, and we all kind of agree on the fact that it shouldn't be a thing anymore because the world
yeah,
is moving that way anyways. So why
yeah,
are we holding on to, like, some people I think need the categories almost as a help to understand the world, and I
yeah.
wish we could help somehow make that less of a thing and make it okay to just not know or have a place in your mind where you need to box the person in.
Because when you box somebody in, it limits your perspective of them and their potentiality and opportunity to be more than just and
Hmm.
to be enough. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's those are spaces that need to be explored more
Hmm.
in just in society in general because we are a global society that is interconnected both physically and digitally. So
Yeah.
it it is the trend of the future.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's scary for me, for some, but it's going there. Like,
yeah, yeah. It's
yeah, I don't
it,
know if I answered your question about like moving into acting and
No, no, that's great. So the fun part about this podcast is it's just I really don't have a plan typically. I just let the
cool.
conversation go as is. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, the answers come as they come. So yeah,
Okay.
that's great. You mentioned Lauren Kim, and I saw it in the
Mhm.
promo video. So the beach scene that she's doing the Sinawali
Yeah.
stick work. That's part. I was part of another project that she got featured in as well. We were doing a collaboration um, with Etok Clothing through my buddy Mark,
Uh-huh.
and he put out a request for FMA practitioners to come up with a cool video so they could feature it with the release of a new shirt. So when I saw that video
Mm.
of Lauren, it's like, oh, I recognize that because I was on the
Yeah.
same project. That's cool.
She also had, I took it from her Cali Diaries series, which
Yep.
she said like I can use any of those, and I thought it was nice because it's a girl fight, which we'll
Yeah.
have a lot in the, and not a lot, but one fight in the in the movie too. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And talking about like actors and actresses that inspire us because like of a certain age we had three very distinct Filipino actors in the space. We had of course Dan Inosanto and then his daughter Diana Inosanto,
Hmm.
and then you had Ernie Reyes Jr. So
Hmm.
and as a young Filipino boy in America, it's like, oh, I see my people. I can see what I can
Ah,
become. I can see that.
uh-huh.
And so it's really cool now within the space. You see so many Filipinos in the movies. It's like, yes, here we go.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think it's really encouraging, and I mostly don't know a lot of them. So I'm every time like, oh, they're Filipino too. Like a lot of, I think, actors who were very famous, and I'm really bad with names, so I'm not gonna try and say any, but like some actors who were famous before didn't identify officially as Filipino, so we never knew. So it's like coming out now, especially in social media, where it's like, oh, they're also Filipino, and then it's like, oh, okay, we're here.
Yeah, it's nice to be seen. Is basically what I see it as. So, so moving forward with this project, actually talking about the project, I'm going to bring up the Kickstarter. So, because we're in a limited time frame as an independent film, I'm going to bring up the Kickstarter. But can you talk about the process of a Kickstarter and what is actually necessary for that? Well, bring this up.
Like the campaign at the moment, like what you need for it, is that what you're asking?
Sure. And like the importance of independent films, because for a lot of people, they don't understand necessarily how the business goes of film production and like the funding process. So this would be a good example or a good opportunity to educate people about that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because independent film is important because we can make content that is not frequently made. So it all depends on us viewers or consumers of media to also like vote with that on what we want to see more. Because people from not underprivileged, this sounds so exaggerated, but if you don't have a rich backing for some reason, like a rich family or donors, you can't basically make movies without that. You could go around and use your iPhone and just make something. So a lot of people have done that. But this project with using martial arts and filming in the Philippines is a bit more ambitious than a short iPhone movie. So that's why we decided to actually go and try to raise funds to make a proper thing that we can run on international festivals all over the world, and then pitch the project later on when you have the short film to pitch it to become a feature film. And that's when you can actually get, big production companies to invest and get them to, invest, because they will actually make money of it when it's a feature film. A short film, however, doesn't necessarily make money, which is why we're trying to raise donations. So that's a very specific, I think, process that people outside of the filmmaking industry wouldn't really understand, because, why do I have to donate if you can make money of the film? Usually you can't. So independent films, if they're especially short films, you can bring them to festivals and have them shown and garner attention for the subject and the topic and the film. But that is the only way to shop it around and then move on to the next step.
So it's an investment.
That's our... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I just didn't understand.
I'm just saying this is doing fundraising like this is an investment because of lack of backing. Okay.
Exactly. And I think one of the categories we also have as rewards is people being executive producers or coming on board as producers. Those are like the higher pledges, because those people then will be associated with the project and can also move forward on into the feature film and just also be aboard on that. So that's kind of the deal that you strike in that. But yeah, we have discussed a lot about like rewards that we can give. It's also hard because it's like at the same point it's a donation, but you also want to give something back. Yeah. So we have some fun stuff which we tried to put in would be like, like you see there's like script consultations or getting like ahead of time insight into the filming process and all these things, getting Arnie sticks from the Philippines. So we have like tried to make like a few different packages that we thought could be interesting. Yeah. I think in hindsight, I would try to make more merch, like have T-shirts, like or sportswear, for example, for people to purchase and get. But yeah, it's such an interesting process because it's not really, you're not selling anything, you're just asking for donations, and people not in the film business don't really know why they would donate, because we're not like a humanitarian cause. We're more like raising awareness to certain topics. And for us, that is raising awareness about FMA, raising awareness about women in martial arts in general, and raising awareness most of all for diversity on screen. And it's hard to get funds for things if they're not out there yet, which sounds really ironic, but like, especially at the moment, the industry is a bit conservative because we had the strikes and we had COVID, and a lot of things aren't as they were. So a lot of like streamers and production companies, I think they're not sure what makes money anymore. So they stick with the big things that are already proven to make money. And if you bring in something new, like that's not been made, it's like either one person is going to be super excited and believe in it, but I think there's just a fairy tale what you would want to hope for. But in reality, people always need to see some kind of proof. And that's why this is a proof of concept, as we call it. It's showing that it's working. And then if it's a coherent, if it like what we're aiming for, it being a good film, that people will be like, oh, I see what this can become.
Well, beautiful thing about a podcast is I can blast this out. So when we're done with this podcast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to blast out the Kickstarter to the 20 some odd Filipino martial arts Facebook groups that I'm part of. So hopefully that'll generate some interest and some support, because as a Filipino martial arts nerd, as like our community is full of, this is awesome. So we'll make this happen, or else we'll make the attempt to make this happen, because I'm reminded of actually the veteran created film Range 15 in collaboration with Article 15 Clothing and Ranger Up. And I think that was the most publicly funded independent film project in history. There may have been something that's surpassed it at this point, but man, they raised a lot of money. But I think attributed to their success is they already had a built-in viewership and community through their t-shirt brands and all their online short films that they do as part of their marketing scheme. Plus, it's the veteran community. When we back something, we really back something. So, I'm hoping the FMA community can do the same thing, because we want to see more of ourselves out there. So, for our audience,
it's funny because we had recently Veterans Day, right?
Yeah, it was on November 11th here on Monday. So, and we just had Filipino American History Month, and
as well,
in October, and in November is Indigenous History Month. So, more of a reason to do so. So, it was interesting also because we had the elections at the same time. So I wonder if that was kind of a disadvantage to run a campaign at the same time. And being first-time filmmaker in that way also is, a new field to go into. So there's a lot of stuff involved around producing a movie and making schedules meet, and so well,
it would I think.
Sorry. There's a delay. So
go ahead.
No, I'm go ahead. There's a delay in my headset, so.
No, I was just saying that's probably why we're still cutting it short at the moment and not getting there yet. But because we probably hit the elections, and now it's Thanksgiving and all these things, it's like at the same time. So but we're still there, and we're going strong. So I'm excited, and I hope this works.
Yeah, me too, because this is a project, a very worthwhile project for, again, multiple reasons as expressed in this episode today. And honestly, more and more that we see FMA and our Filam community in the film space, more people are aware of it, and more as a community we grow, because again, getting out of the back room of martial arts schools and actually coming to the front of the room. This is definitely one of those ways to do that, of saying, hey, we are valuable, because clearly we are, but the name and actually the branding of FMA properly is also valuable. So projects like this help push that forward. So
I think someone once told me, like, I don't know who that was, but they were saying that FMA needs to be more sexy. I was like, what do you mean? But I think in general, just having FMA as something that we can be proud about is would be nice. Not something that's just, oh, also that was FMA, by the way. Like, yeah.
It is a question. I mean, we've gone through this, but it is a question constantly gets brought up in this podcast as to why is FMA not to the forefront. And again, everybody has a varied list of answers, but hopefully we can fix that problem here in the next few years, if not the next generation. So,
well, we'll try hard to make the movie, make it very cool in the movie, so that people are like, "What is that?"
Yeah, and clearly,
and we're also happy from the community to like give input and everything. Like it's just like an open source kind of thing. Like whatever inspiration and thoughts. Like I was just where we were working on the choreography, I was like trying to think of what the GMs always do. Like, you know, the stuff where they disarm you in a second. I'm just like, what are these things? We need to find them. So if anyone has inspirations or videos or stuff they'd like to send over that we can use and build in, that would be amazing.
I'm going to link you with my friend Paulo Rubio. He's probably the most prominent FMA social media guru out there. So he might be able to help. So he's doing the seminar circuit right now, but yeah, he's prolific in the social media scene. So I'll forward this to him as well. So
that's so cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Moving forward, actually, because I don't know how much time you have this morning.
I still have time.
Okay. Yeah. Talking about women's issues in FMA, because I don't often have a Filipino practitioner as a female on my podcast.
No, what?
Yeah, it's I don't know, but martial arts is a male-dominant space, but it doesn't have to be. And so dealing with women's representation in not only in the films, but in martial arts in general is a question that gets brought up as to why is there not enough female representation? Who are these actresses and heroines that we can look up to? Because as prominent in the Filipino martial arts community, that is like the female lead is Diana Inosanto. But there's so many of you that are also up and coming and have been there the entire time. So can you speak to what it's like to be a woman in the FMA community and some of the things that you would give notes to the FMA community to say, hey, we can do better. Help us out here.
I won't say too much representing as a woman because I feel like I'm so new in it that I don't want to, misrepresent anything. So if anyone disagrees, please do. My experience would have, I also have struggled to meet other women in the industry. And I think in general that, for starters, is already, it already feels less, not, again, safe is the wrong word because obviously I don't feel unsafe, but I think it just feels more comfortable if there's another woman. And I think one of the main problems is the atmosphere, if ever. It is the showing off, proving that I'm better than, and mistakes are seen as you're still not good enough. And I mean, the first place where I was taught FMA, for me, it was overwhelming because I was just shown the drill once and then it was like, go figure. And I can learn like that, but I won't learn fast. And if someone breaks it down for me, I see it, I can get it broken down once and then I can go and practice and then I'll get it and it's done. But if people think that overwhelming the student is a good thing, I don't know, it's not a culture that I subscribe to. And I'm not sure if that's because I'm a woman or not.
It's an issue of pedagogy. And
maybe.
So
but I don't know if that's a cultural FMA thing of like, here it is. Now find out, man. Like, I don't know.
It is. It's straight up.
Okay. Okay, so that's one thing. Change that, I think.
There's not a lot of formal educators in the FMA space. I mean, there is now, but when it comes to like the totality of FMA or just martial arts in general, there's not a lot of classically trained educators in the space. It's very much an apprenticeship being raised up into it, but actually being taught how to teach, being taught how to learn, how to teach other people to learn, as is direct social science that's not taught. There's not a lot of people that are professional educators. So yeah, there's that issue.
Okay. Yeah, because some people, for example, need to ask questions. Some people need to, for example, I personally need to, I kind of perceive the whole movement. So if they only explain one thing, I'm like, but your feet did something. What was that? And I try to like get it all in my body at the same time once, and not learn that first and then correct the other thing again. So there's like different learning styles which I think would help if people would adapt more to that. And I think it's a general culture of not having to push through, which I think is a male thing. It's like hard, and I'm strong, and I'm just generalizing, but that's how I felt it was in other martial arts in general. And I remember the first stunt workshop I went to, it was all on direct contact.
Yeah.
So like on the body, like that's quite common usually for stunts that on the body is direct contact and face not. But those people were martial artists.
Yeah.
So their direct contact was pretty bad. And it was kind of like, you know, they did check if I'm okay, but like it didn't feel like I could say no. But at the end of the day, I didn't come back for day 2 because I was sick to the stomach from all the impact. Yeah. And I hadn't trained that. So I think there just needs to be more of a softer environment where it's okay to learn, where it's okay to be scared, where it's okay to, for example, mix up your left and right stuff and not know which hand that was. And yeah, I think it's hard if you have to hide that and play cool and just be okay. Because for me, that's a stressful learning environment and I won't come back. Yeah.
Yep. That is a common theme that in just talking with women who come into the martial arts is, again, the dynamic of a highly aggressive machismo community of tough it out and figure it out. The other one of like, we're going to throw you in the deep end while you're blind and your hands are tied behind your back. That's also the sink or swim approach to a lot of Filipino or just martial arts combat sports training as it is. It's not right, but it is what it is.
And again, also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Could it be also that there is, like you said, there's no system to it? Like there's no curriculum as such? I heard when I was back home and checking out different studios that they are starting to introduce belts. But I heard that that's kind of new.
Sort of. So when it comes to the history of Filipino martial arts, I mean, the codification goes back to Doce Pares, which is after World War II and the independence of the Philippines. And the Doce Pares borrowed highly from Japanese and Chinese martial arts structures. So this is where you see like the gi is adopted from Japanese martial arts, like a Japanese kimono gi. So there's that. The belt and rank system and the structure for education in the school district is very structured and borrowed from Japanese martial arts, because Japanese martial arts as an educational institution is a good example of how to do things. So borrowing that's how that came about. So like Doce Pares specifically has that structure in place, but it has some holes, just like any other system. Or I should say any other system of education. And it boils down to pedagogy, curriculum, and the instructor's capability in those things. So you see in the West, there is certain systems that have a very strong curriculum, but they may not necessarily have an instructorship training program to help develop their pedagogy and their instructor approachability. So, because you may be an excellent martial artist, but you might be a pretty crappy instructor as in like communicating things to people and guiding them through. Because like systems like Modern Arnis, Bikini Tarsia, and Balintawak have a very structured curriculum where you can definitely tell where's the benchmarks and here's the standards, and there is that belt and ranking, not necessarily belt, but that ranking system that comes up with it. But that doesn't account for the ability of the instructor's ability to teach, because it goes back to this issue of not every martial arts instructor is a formal educator. So that is the dynamic. And again, very much back into the Philippines with that old school backyard in the park approach to training. It's very much do this, figure it out. So yeah. So that dynamic is messy and it's tricky. So what it really comes down to is find the right instructor. And the benefit of social media and just modern society now is we have a Rolodex literally that we can scroll through and say, oh, this is the way this instructor teaches because they post it out online, and here they are on the map. So Brian Sloyer, of course, through Balintawak LA is a great example of somebody who's approachable, and it's got a great curriculum to back him and a great community to support him, and he's a phenomenal instructor as it is anyways. So
okay, I'm excited to go there. Can't wait. I was actually discussing this recently with the stunt team in our film, because I was saying that I want the atmosphere on set and in the team in general to be similarly I don't like the word safe, but I can't think of another word. Safe and warm, and like it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to especially not know, because I feel like a lot of stuff goes wrong when people can't admit that they don't know something. There's like a culture of like, I'm not going to admit that I don't know, because it would be a loss of face or something. So I just want people not knowing, being confused, having a blackout at the moment. Like we were working on the choreo and we just got stuck and we were like laughing the whole time because it's totally fine to not be high performance all the time, because I think those atmospheres they reduce room for creativity and they reduce the space for good work. So I think in general, we should give each other space to, feel and be okay and be confused and be whatever we are right now, and have that as a work culture in general, which I think I came from a lot of male-dominated industries. I worked as a programmer for a while. I'm also a rock climber outdoors. So like it's been all around me a lot. So I just for a long time I just accepted it as status quo. But thankfully over time I realized like, no, I can create my own culture, and it's just hard to enforce it. And be like, no, this is not like in coding, for example, sometimes I would have to stand up and be like, no, this is not how we talk to each other. That's not cool. But it makes you the bad guy and it's scary. But yeah, I think we've got to do it. I mean, somewhere like you're doing it with this podcast the same way.
I'm trying, but
I listened to some of your episodes. I was like, wow, this is some deep, vulnerable stuff going on here.
Well, thanks. Yeah, this podcast it's a couple of different projects that I have, a couple of different brands on the fire that I'm working on here. But again, it's telling the human stories, because again, learning is a messy process full of mistakes. It's just we're so used to seeing the highly polished outcome of the perfect cut. And it's great to see, but it's not exactly genuine. And seeing the genuine process of education and learning through discovery and being messy, that a lot of people are yearning for that, especially in the social media space of content creation, especially in the martial arts space. You can definitely tell a person who's done multiple takes versus the person like, we're doing a one take, you're going to see all the mess ups, but this is just what it is. Deal with it. And I find there's a lot of people who want to see that more messy approach to things and say, because it's honest, it's genuine, and you actually get to connect to the person and not necessarily the persona, because there's a lot of personas out there in social media when it comes to the martial arts digital space. So and so with that, for like the training environment with your film, I mean, again, safe space is I find the correct term, because you have to find that trust in your tribe, so you guys can have that vulnerability to admit that you have a training and educational deficit, and it provides the opportunity for somebody to mentor you up through that. Because again, that's tribe, that's an actual learning space. It's not that it's authoritarian approach of like, do this, follow me, do that. Because again, utilizing the Mr. Miyagi approach versus the Cobra Kai approach, Mr. Miyagi was very developmental. Cobra Kai is like command, militant, and you will do it this way because I said so. So yeah, and I find that is based upon, again, the individual culture of a person and where they are at in their life and their enlightenment. So yeah.
That's funny because in the movie, the owner of the gym is kind of our Cobra Kai. And the person who will end up helping the main protagonist is probably then their Mr. Miyagi. In the sense of being a queer martial artist on board. So it's like exploring all these things together because they kind of are linked anyways, because I think similarly to women, queer people also don't have much of space, I guess, because it doesn't feel very safe for them.
No.
So I that's why we use the title of Karate Kid. And I've gotten a lot of requests to remove karate from the title. But it's hard because it's the reference is to the Karate Kid movies. So I can't really remove karate from there, but
hopefully there isn't a copyright strike as a result of it. But I understand brand recognition, because here's the other one too, with martial arts in the community and just in America, everybody thinks it's karate, regardless of what it is. It's either it's karate or MMA. Clearly you can tell it's jujitsu, but honestly, like with the American basic consumer of media, it's either karate or it's MMA. So and then it comes down to like attention to the specificity and education from the average viewer. So it does have to like sell somehow and attract attention and draw you like viewers into what they're going to see, and it is going to be a martial arts movie. So have you guys considered doing like a web series on YouTube with short films? Because that's a huge digital creation space for a lot of up and coming stunt people. Because it's also a free platform. So
to do it with our film or beforehand or around
just in general. Yeah.
Yes, definitely considered that. Like an FMA web series would be cool. I mean, now I went a lot to train at Swordplay, and there's like a lot of Filipinos there. So I'm like, oh, why don't we all get together and regularly train? Because
and have lunch thereafter, because it's the meal that matters.
Yes. Exactly. That's what's been happening too. And there's been talk of karaoke sessions, and just has to be.
Absolutely. So unique to the experience as a woman in the martial arts, and specifically Filipino martial arts, there's some great examples of women out there, like Janelle, what's her last name? Janelle DeBrong? I don't know. I'm going to butcher it, but there's several women out there that are phenomenal martial artists in the Filipino martial arts space, and they do great things for our community. Tuhan Arlene is another one. But with that, like content creation for women specific Filipino martial arts, that's also there's a lot of women, like I said, that do it, but I don't see a lot of it being expressed in the overall like algorithm that is social media. So adding to that would, I think, also be really beneficial. So
yeah, that's very interesting, because I always think coming again, my thoughts came from climbing at that time, because route setting, for example, is like, of course, the rock has its unique features, but where you place the bolts and where you set the route is again the human add-on. It's the same time in the gym where people decide to place the holds. If that's mostly men doing it, it will bias the way we climb in a certain way. And in the same way, I think choreographies and fighting styles will be inspired more by male bodies versus women's bodies. And I know that might sound like nitpicky, but I do think that there is differences because of difference of force, because of difference of height, because of more flexibility, different position of our hips. I don't know. There will be things that we would do, or in women's bodies you would do, and others wouldn't, So I think that's interesting and can create more diversity in what we see on screen.
Yeah, the human frame is pretty standard. We have 2 arms, 2 legs. The anatomy is pretty standard. However, the modality of movement and the expression is very different between the genders. And having worked with fighters for the majority of my professional life, and having had female fighters, they move differently than men do. There's a lot of the similar, like, principle-based approach to where they work in, because they can't work against physics necessarily. Like, we all move in a straight, we move forward, we move back. Those things can't be changed. The concepts are, we try to adapt and apply into it. But when it comes to a woman's movement versus a man's, there's very subtle, but it's also distinct differences. And it's unique, but it's also really cool to see that when people recognize, because for those who can see, they can see the differences, and recognizing, and this is where just we need to see more female practitioners in the space so they can actually see that. Because I mean, if you look, I'll look at the Shaw brothers and Chinese martial arts. Michelle Yeoh moves a lot different than Jet Li.
Yeah,
and there's there is that male-female energy dynamic that makes it so interesting and special. And this is where, again, in the expression of Filipino martial arts that are women have a very distinct energy about them that a lot of men just don't have. They have a different type of intensity that I have found. I find there's more artistry, but a lot of more like dynamic artistry that is it's hard to describe. It's different and it's beautiful. Men, it's a lot of power. Women, there's something unique to it that, again, I think needs to be seen more in the space, because it'll also inspire the next generation moving forward to say that, yes, we can do that.
That's super interesting. I recently discovered another half Filipina FMA girl online just through social media. So I think that's something where we can expand more into the space. And like you said, I think it's scary to create content. Just making the video was super scary for me because it's so personal, and I was so embarrassed when I put it out. But you have to start somewhere, and it's like I feel like sometimes you need to jump into the cold water and just swim from there and see what happens. And I think if we don't create our own content, then nothing will happen anyways. Unless someone is brave enough to do it. But why not just, like you said, do it? So I'm very glad you're suggesting it, because I have been thinking about it and haven't yet done anything.
Being unapologetically unique and being unapologetically genuine is something that is necessary in this space. Because again, like, personality versus persona, because you see a lot of personas in the social media space, but you don't actually see a lot of like the genuine personality of a person. And like I said, people want to see more of that rather than the polished clone that we see over and over and over. So and I'm very curious how it's going to span out. So I'm very excited to make this movie. I still hope it works. I mean, I'm sure it will somehow, but yeah. Well, like I said, I will do my part here and make sure that we get it out here. Because again, I believe in this project, because this project's really cool. So I don't know how much time you got, but I'm actually pretty short on time here. So, and do you have any final thoughts in the leading out? I'm going to put this up on the screen again, and I'll put a link. I just want everyone who's listening and who's interested in this to know that we're like a very supportive and kind-hearted team that really wants to do something good and create something that represents. We're paying attention to authenticity, and if you are friends with a female martial artist, if you have daughters, if you've ever struggled with your own identity or have faced situations where you didn't seem like you belonged, I'm sure we all have been through something similar. And this is, just know that we're doing it for you guys. Even if you can't support, it's just for everyone to know that we're working on making this world a bit better. Awesome. Again, you're leading instead of following. And so thank you for being a leader in our community by presenting yourself authentic and vulnerable. But again, we need more leaders, and less people are going to sit back and trolling in the comment section. So yeah, good on you, and thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to drop you down. I'm going to do my outro, and go ahead and hang out in the lobby. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Again, thank you for the gift of your time and the passion behind this project. So yeah, I'll talk to you soon. I'm going to drop you down real quick.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody. So episode 41 in the bag. Go to the Kickstarter and support this. Check it out. Spread it. Do all the things, because if we want to see more FMA in the scene and when it comes to popular media like the movies, support Filipino independent filmmakers so we can see ourselves out there, because we deserve it. So go do it. So check it out. Anyways, thanks for everybody for hanging out. I have a couple more episodes coming down the line, and yeah, look for those flyers. But in the meantime, I will see everybody later, and let's do this outro. I'll see ya. Bye, guys.